Any questions at all on the Rust code, on serialization, whatever it is, let me know. Do you have an object-oriented programming code example? I'm not exactly sure what you mean, Alan. This here is object-oriented code right here. And Rust is not necessarily object-oriented. It's a little bit more like functional, or not functional, imperative. Does the Solana runtime ensure all parameters are correct and valid, or do you have to validate? So basically, it's not going to ensure your parameters are correct. What's going to do that is this part right here. It's going to try to interpret the enum variant with the args from the bytes. So if you have like the wrong data type, this will fail, right? There is kind of an edge case where like it might accidentally interpret the wrong one, and that's something you have to kind of like make sure you're protected against. So, it's good. Well, I guess technically it wouldn't necessarily do that because with Rust, you've got the variant and the args, right? So as long as you have the proper variant, that shouldn't happen. But if you like pass in a number instead of a string, this won't work. Like it won't give you any of these. So that's how it protects against the proper data types. If you send the wrong parameters, like if you on your client side put the wrong value in here, no, there's no check. The runtime itself will check your accounts. So like if you look at our program, we're expecting our payer. And if we do something like this, where like, say we have like account 1 and account 2, and I mentioned this earlier, if you only pass in 2 public keys and your smart contract's expecting 3, it'll fail. If you put them in the wrong order, it'll also fail. Or no, it won't fail. It'll just do the wrong stuff. And like your signers might not line up. But so yeah, that's really important. If you have too many, like if you have 4 and it's expecting 3, that 4th one won't get picked up, So you have to just remember this is a list and your program depends on the order of it. So you definitely want to make sure that you keep that in mind. Your program itself can check to make sure that certain addresses are the same, right? Like let's say I want one of these to be like the system program. I can do a little check to make sure that like the system program is what it's supposed to be. You know what I mean? So you can do stuff like that with your on-chain code. But the runtime, all the runtime is really going to do is make sure that you're not trying to write to the same account in 2 different spots, because programs can run in parallel. So like your same code will run, multi-threaded. And so it's going to look at those addresses to make sure that any instance of your program isn't using the same account in 2 instances where it would be writing. It's not going to really check much of your custom like configurations though. That's going to be mostly done with your code. Let's see. Comparison to EVM, what would be the equivalent of message.sender in Rust Solana contracts, and how to capture or create validations on the programs? Message sender. Okay, so I'm not super familiar with writing EVM smart contracts, but I'm assuming you're talking about trying to figure out who sent the transaction. In Solana, it's the fee payer. So you saw on the Explorer, there was a fee payer person involved with whatever kind of like transaction is being sent. In that case, it was this guy here. To send a transaction, you have to pay for it. You have to pay for gas. That is going to be the person who sends it. So message.sender, the equivalent is fee payer. And so in this case, you would want to include that in your accounts list. There's not a way to, like, that's not an additional field that you can just get. When you write a program, you want to also have the fee payer in here. So it's not a default thing. You'd have to add them to this list. So like in the case of our instructions here, you can see that I'm adding the payer right here. You would just do that. So you'd have to just make sure you also add them. And then, are there any perks or unique performance results of using Rust for building on chain? Yes, definitely. So I can't necessarily compare it with Solidity because I don't know too much about Solidity. But a couple things that are cool about Rust is especially for those of you guys who've never written Rust before. You can see all these ampersands. Rust is very strict on how you deal with memory. So what these are called are references. So if you ever written like C++ or C, you're probably familiar with the concept of like pointers and maybe some borrowing stuff. I don't know the exact syntax because I've never written C, but Rust is basically going to make sure that you are pointing, like if you're going to point at a value and just reference what its value is, that's a reference. If you're going to actually take the object itself and do something with it, that's ownership. And the point is, in a language like JavaScript, that's interpreted by the compiler, and it's really just making its best guess. And sometimes it's playing to the safe side of just cloning things. So, like for example, if you do like let x equal 5, and then you say let y equal x, then you say y equals y times 2. This will only change y, right? X will still be 5. In Rust, that's not the case. Now, integers are different. In Rust, integers are always references because they're hard-coded, and it gets a little complicated. But the point is, when you do something like this with objects, Rust will make sure that you tell it what you want to do. Do you want y to become the object that was in X? Or do you want y to just borrow the value of the object in X? And for this reason, you get highly performant smart contracts on Solana. Solana is one big distributed computer, just like EVM. And so when you have memory strict and safe smart contracts, you get really high performance. So it's really cool. And also like a couple other minor things, like Rust is pretty fun to write. Some of the syntax is cool. I love doing match statements, stuff like that. And there's a couple like quirky things that you guys would enjoy if you're like a little bit of a nerd like I am. But overall, yes, there's a little bit of performance enhancing features that go along with Rust. How should we create? Should we create the project using VS Code or create a project in Solana Playground? So in Solana Playground, good question. What you're going to want to do is you can see here that this is your program, and you can add JavaScript code like right here, and it'll work. It's just a little tricky to import because if you do like this and you try to import, let's say we want to import all this stuff. At the moment, I don't believe this works. See? So importing code is a little bit tricky when you want to also bring in the TypeScript stuff. And honestly, you guys can, like, this is an open source project. You can pass in that as an issue and see if somebody wants to pick that up or work on it with you. But if you're building this yourself from scratch, you can always just do like, you can just create folders. A little bit tricky to do, I guess, but you can build it all in SolPG if you want. I personally recommend, just because like I love my local setup, I would do it in VS Code, but this is a great tool for just testing your program. And the neat thing is you can actually deploy it like we did down here. And you can go here and get your program's information. So let's see. And you can get the ID of the program, and then you can go ahead and just run your test locally against it. So like if I change this where I have program.public key, if I just do this and I say new public key, I can just pass my program's public key right there from SolPG. And that'll allow me to use my local JavaScript setup to go hit my program, because as long as I'm pointing to the same network, which in this case is DevNet, but we deployed to local net. So once you use SolPG to send your program off to the network, you can use just JavaScript locally to go interact with it, or you can use the built-in IDE to write all your code. Totally up to you. Honestly, it's whatever's easier. If you have trouble installing anything, go with SolPG. But if maybe you can install Solana and Node, but you can't get Rust for some reason, then you can go with VS Code and you can use SolPG just for your Rust code. If you can get all three, Rust, Node, Solana, go local. That's just my take though.